Good afternoon, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg here again with another fireside seminar, hunting seminar. You know, this seminar might be one of the most important seminars you've ever heard in the future, because, like it or not, what's been happening to us Nordbergs up in our hunting area up near the Canadian border is eventually going to happen to you, if it isn't already happening. If you're wondering what's happening is, well, global warming has been producing a lot of warm days during our November deer hunting season. So warm that our whitetails, when they have their winter coats, and they all have fully grown winter coats by then, can't stand it when the temperatures are up over 50 degrees. If the temperatures are up over that 50-degree mark, they won't even get out of their beds during the day. So essentially they become nocturnal because they'll only move at night when it's cooler. And so they become nocturnal deer. And how do you hunt deer that only move around at night? Well, that's one of the reasons we're having problems. We got that for sure. There's no doubt about that. The other reason is that our wolves have been allowed to become so numerous that they finally ate up 97% of the deer that normally inhabit our area, reducing deer numbers from 22 per square mile down to 3 per square mile. And when you don't have many deer, it gets to be a little harder to hunt deer, of course, quite a bit harder. And at that point, when there's not so many deer, the wolves start hunting day and night. And with that kind of hunting pressure, those deer become nocturnal. It's one of the several ways that they have of helping to relieve the pressure, the great hunting pressure provided by wolves. So we've got those two things going on. And it's been tough. In the last 3 years, or 2 years, we only managed to take one buck in each of those 2 years. One was a decent 8-pointer, and last year was spike buck taken by one of my grandsons. That's kind of a long way from the way it used to be. For 30 years, we were able to take 4 mature bucks a year up there on the average. We started out every season, my 3 sons and I, having at least 3 mature bucks to hunt, which greatly improved our odds of being able to get our self-imposed limit of 4 per year. We always had a self-imposed limit, so we went over to hunt our bucks. Well, last year we were down to 3 mature bucks in our hunting area. So it's kind of terrible there. And of course, we don't see any deer all day long, hardly any deer. Last year I only saw 1 deer during daylight. I saw one of our dominant breeding bucks just before first light in the morning while I was on my way to a stand site. But that was it. That's kind of terrible hunting. The old days we used to see 10, 20 deer per day, per hunter. And now when it's down to this point where we have more sightings of wolves than deer. Enough of that, but so you see we've been having some problems there. Now, back at the beginning of 1990, we moved into a new hunting area, and we were having a lot of difficulty hunting the bucks there. They were quite a bit more elusive than the bucks we had been used to hunting during the previous years. And so we had to develop new ways of hunting whitetails. And in the process, we created 6 new stand hunting methods that worked really well. And one of them was the stand hunting method I'm going to talk about today. And the reason I'm talking about this one first is what we learned there is the basis for greatly improving hunting under the conditions that we're suffering with today. You know, eventually all whitetails in America are going to be affected by global warming. When it gets to be much warmer than is comfortable for them during hunting season, they're going to be nocturnal deer. And if you got nocturnal deer, you're going to have the same problems we're having right now. Those of you that are in areas where they've been introducing wolves or Well, yeah, where people are going to be resistant to reducing wolf numbers, you're going to have the same problems. So look forward to that. It's not something to look forward to. It's terrible. So anyway, we've had 3 years now to study what's been happening and trying to figure out what we can do to improve our hunting under these terrible conditions. And we figured out some ways. And one of the ways we're going to use a lot in the future to improve our hunting method is one of those new hunting techniques that we learned since 1990. And we call this hunting method the gentle nudge. Now, I've talked about it before in the past, but for those of you who have never seen my earlier seminars, they're still available on YouTube, about the gentle nudge, you should check back on that for that subject and learn more about it. But I'm going to tell you quickly for those of you, well, even you guys that haven't seen that for a while, let me show you something here now. The first time we ever used this method, one of my sons came to camp at noon after a morning in the woods and announced, as often happens, because most of the time we're hunting during the period when does are in heat, that first 2-week period of breeding in the winter, in November. And whenever we discovered years ago that when you find tracks of a deer that where in snow, where he dragged his hoofs from track to track, it almost looks like ski tracks, but drag them from track to track. Those are the tracks of a buck. It might be a yearling or with just little 3-inch long hoof prints, or a dominant breeding buck with 4-inch long hoof prints. But if he's dragging his hoofs from track to track, he's smelling the pheromone being emitted into the air by a doe in heat. And they don't do it constantly when they smell, but usually when they first smell it or with a doe, or they're with a doe in heat, they'll start walking kind of weirdly, like stiff-legged. They don't bend their knees, and that's why they drag their hoofs from track to track when they're under the influence of that pheromone. So when Ken came to camp that day, he said on the way back, he said, I found some railroad tracks. Now that might sound like a strange thing for a hunter to say, but in our camp that means he found tracks of a buck who was dragging his hoofs from track to track. And the kids back in the old days, they named those tracks railroad tracks. It looked like a railroad track going through the snow. One of the things that I've been thinking about for quite a while up to that point is I wish I knew a way to take advantage of those tracks. Because, well, like for example, that day, he came in at noon for lunch. Now, he said those tracks weren't there when he went out in the morning to a stand site that he was using, and but when he came back there, they were. Now, what that meant was that buck was smelling a doe in heat, and airborne. It was coming toward him, and at that particular day, the wind was blowing, well, kind of a west-southwest, like that arrow was pointing there. And so right away what you could assume, in that situation is that buck was smelling a doe in heat, and that doe in heat, it was midday, it was in its bedding area. And we've been scouting that country really well, and I knew where that bedding area was. He found the tracks down here somewhere, here's where the stand site is, and he found those tracks, and it was heading in that direction. So right away we knew at that point, right now here at lunchtime, that buck is with that doe right there in that bedding area. And so I'd had this idea for a long time. Another thing that we have learned, whenever you try to drive an older buck, my yearling bucks are not bright about such things, but bucks that have been surviving hunters for 3 to 6 years, they know that whenever hunters try to move them in one direction, or wolves even, in one direction, they're expecting an ambush down there, downwind there somewhere, and they don't want to go downwind very far. So if I had gone to this place and said, well, can you go to your stand site, and I'll go up there upwind, and I'll try to drive that buck toward you, what big bucks always did, they always do it. You couldn't drive them very far downwind, especially downwind. They didn't want to go that way because when they get pushed by anything, they're thinking, oh, there's an ambush over here. And they learned that from the wolves. But so they don't want to go there. So as soon as they think it's safe, they'll go left or right, veer left or right, and then they'll start traveling into the wind to get out of the area. And they go into the wind so they can smell any ambush that's up ahead and then avoid it. That's a sensible thing to do. But big bucks were really good at that. So I thought, well, one thing I want to try is try to make a buck go to a downwind hunter willingly without trying to push it that way. And when I thought, you know, airborne human scent might do that. And I've learned a lot about what airborne scent does when it's leaving your body in your woods. You know, wherever you go, you've got this big triangular area spreading out downwind. And it just keeps going and going and going. And any deer that's caught inside that thing, and 100 yards downwind, that it can spread out in a light wind as much as 100 yards crosswind. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger as it goes downwind. And any deer that's caught in there is going to smell you. And they, whitetails can tell how far away you are by the intensity of your odors. And they can, they do it all the time. And I was able to prove that many times in previous years with experiments about what they can smell and that sort of thing and how far away. But at any rate, so what I had in mind is that he'll send him over there, and what I would do is sneak through the woods, quietly, and get upwind of where those deer. And when I was upwind, I thought the worst thing I could do is walk toward them, like you would do if you're going to chase them, try to chase them toward a hunter downwind. I want to go in crosswind. When my scent finally hits those deer in that bedding area, I didn't want them to know I was moving toward them. But if I was moving crosswind, they would know that my intensity of my odors aren't getting stronger. They might even hear a little brush snap now and then when I'm walking. But I wanted to be about 100 yards away. And if I'm not moving toward them, and they would be able to tell by my odors alone that I'm not moving toward them, they wouldn't be near as alarmed as they might be otherwise. And so they wouldn't run away. And so they would stay there. They'd be nervous about this. 100 yards, they don't like you to be 100 yards away. But that's far enough away so they wouldn't be compelled to run away or bound away. And you don't want a buck to bound away, because if you do that during the hunting season, he's gone for the hunting season. That's just typical. But anyway, so I wanted them to know I wasn't moving toward them. I'm going this way. And they would consider me at that point to be harmless because I'm not moving toward them. And then I wanted to sit down right here. I had a spot figured out upwind of where those deer, about 100 yards upwind. I was going to sit down there. There's kind of a big long opening here, a swamp and marsh and beaver ponds and then along the stream up here. But anyway, I was going to sit down right there. And then when I sit down, they would, pretty soon they notice, gee, the intensity of my odors isn't changing. It isn't getting stronger in the time I'm coming toward them, and it's not getting weaker, meaning I'm going away, and it isn't moving off to one side or the other side. It wasn't changing at all. So then they would know, those deer, these experienced deer, especially a dominant breeding buck with a doe, and they would know, I'm a stand hunter. I'm just sitting there. Now our deer know stand hunters really well. They've learned all kinds of stuff about stand hunting from my sons and I, my hunting partners and I. And they don't mind stand hunters because stand hunters don't pursue them. They find them in the woods all the time. And these stand hunters don't chase them. They don't sneak after them. They don't, try to stalk them or anything like that. So they find us as, he's just another stand hunter, nothing to worry about. So they settle down here. Well, now, so I'm sitting here, and while I'm sitting here, all my scents are spreading downwind, and this triangle area getting bigger and bigger, and all across the area, going right through the area where they're bedded. Now, eventually, they're going to move from that area. It's time to go eat. You know, it's time to go get up and start feeding in the afternoon. And usually when whitetails decide to leave a bedding area, they'll go into the wind so they can start out not worrying about whether there's something dangerous up there, and then they'll work their way around to get to wherever they're going to go feeding. So anyway, when they finally get up, there's only one way they're going to go. They're going to go straight downwind because they want to keep smelling me until they get at least 200 yards away. Now, I've learned years ago that whitetails that are 200 yards downwind of you aren't really afraid of you at all, as long as you aren't getting closer. You can go by, you can be sitting there. They feel perfectly comfortable having you 200 yards upwind. And so I figured, well, these deer, when they leave, they want to make sure I'm not sneaking up on them. They want to keep track of me. They'll go downwind so they can keep track of me as they go. And then I figured, well, when they go downwind, they're going to want to go at least 200 yards before they decide, you know, which way they might want to go from there. So they're going to end up right here within easy shooting range of my son Ken. And that's what happened. I sat there, and eventually those deer got up and went straight to where he was. And he had a really easy shot. He got a nice dominant breeding buck. You see a picture of it here. That afternoon, after lunchtime. And it worked perfectly. And we figured out, well, when we're going to do something like this, the guy that's going to be downwind should go first. And it should wait 15 minutes or longer before you head to the upwind end, because just in case you goof up here and those deer go out when you get to the upwind section, maybe you end up too close or something. You want this guy to be down here before they make any moves like that. But if they start bounding, they're not going to go straight downwind. They're going to go some other direction pretty quickly. But anyway, this worked good, you know. Well, the reason it worked good is that, well, first of all, my scent going downwind was almost like a fence line. They didn't want to go that way. No, that was their own choice. You know, I wasn't pushing them, but they knew I was there, so they didn't want to go this way. And when they did leave, they wanted to keep going downwind, keeping track of me in case I started to come after them until they were at least 200 yards away. In which you put them right where Ken was. And it worked so perfectly. And it worked so good. And, you know, I decided to call this, you know, rather than try to push a deer physically by tracking them to the bedding area, call this the gentle nudge, you know, just by scent moving them in a certain direction. But this is the first time I knew a way to make an older buck willingly go downwind toward a stand hunter. Up, you know, a certain amount of distance. A stand hunter they didn't know was there. That stand hunter's downwind, and they got there without the buck knowing it. So it was a great way. And you know what? 5 years in a row, we got a buck that was with that doe in estrus in that bedding area midday. 5 years in a row, we took the dominant buck of this area while it was with the doe in estrus. Because we found its railroad tracks, you know, that day. And you know, you have to do this quickly because that doe, any doe, whether it's a yearling or a mature doe, is only going to be in estrus for 24 to 26 hours during this period. If you wait till tomorrow to do this, might be too late. The doe is no longer in heat and the buck's somewhere else. So when you do something like this, you got to do it right away. But if you do it carefully, like I just explained, your odds of being able to take a big buck with a doe in heat are excellent. Well, today it's a different program. we don't have, our deer numbers are way down, and because of the wolves hunting deer day and night, like they do, uh, our does with young, the surviving does with young, have banded together. They've been making herds, small herds, in different parts of our 10 square mile study area, my study area. They create herds of deer, maybe a dozen deer in a herd. And those deer start utilizing all the ranges of the does, whether they're living does or does that are no longer there because the numbers are way down. Usually there's 4 or 5 doe home ranges inside of a dominant buck square mile home range or breeding range. So, but this wasn't this way anymore. And so what these does did, they banded together. Now, whenever whitetails together, they form a pecking order. And when you have a new little herd like that, well, they might have to kick each other a few times to decide who's going to be the big boss doe in this herd, but they eventually get it done. And usually that's a doe that's been around a while. Does can live up to twice as long as bucks. Bucks usually don't survive their 7th winter, but does can live up to 14 years. Not many get that old, but 10 years is pretty common for does. So this doe has been living that long because she's been really good at avoiding hunters and wolves. So she becomes the one that decides what the little herd is going to do and where they're going to eat, where they're going to bed, and what they started doing is traveling all through this much huger, bigger area, actually over 2 square miles in size, and feeding at different areas every day and bedding at different areas every day. So how do you predict where they're going to be? It gets to be a haphazard thing when they're doing it in an area that large. You just can't figure out where in the devil they're going to be in the morning. In the old days, it would really, find fresh tracks of a doe and say a big buck in a feeding area. Well, that chances are that buck is going to be with that doe in the next feeding period, like later in the day or tomorrow morning, and they'll be there. Yeah, well, you just don't have that advantage anymore. It really hurts stand on you a lot to not be able to predict things like that. I started thinking about that, what in the world are we going to do? We need a new hunting method. And finally figured it out. One of the things we're going to do, and this is going to be basic, this gentle nudge hunting method, going to be basic to almost everything we do in the future to improve our hunting. Let's say here's an area, a feeding area, or it used to be a really big feeding area. There's going to be times, even where the only problem, maybe you don't have any wolves there, but when you have problems because of global warming, we know that global warming weather can be quite erratic. It can be really hot for a few days and then cold, and we've been seeing that all winter. This erratic move almost from day to day sometimes. One day real nice and warm, and the next day way below zero, that kind of thing. Well, that's probably going to continue happening for a number of years. Eventually it won't be erratic. Eventually it'll always be really warm during the day, but for a while it's not going to be that way. So there's going to be days when these nocturnal deer that you can't find on days when it's really warm, and they aren't moving. It's just like there's no deer left in the whole area. But you get some days where you get normal temperatures, maybe 2-3 days in a row. Well, you might be thinking, well, last year they just loved this browse area. It was full of red twig dogwoods. They grow wild up in our hunting area, and maybe a lot of saplings from sugar maples, and they're red. And deer love those things for browse in the wintertime. And boy, this area used to be so good, Well, let's say you're out there, like last year and the year before, we had 70-degree weather on opening day. My son Dave managed to get one on opening day that year, but it was in the cool of the morning, the first thing in the morning on opening day. But at any rate, but let's say it's been really warm and geez, the deer aren't moving and you aren't seeing any deer moving, and that's terrible for stand hunting. You know, that's awful. So, but you might think, well, gee, according to the weather report on the weather radio, it's going to be normal tomorrow. Gee, we're going to have a low of say 10 above zero and a high of 20 tomorrow. Oh, those deer, you know, they've been suffering from the heat. They're going to probably be back to this old favorite feeding area or some feeding area in the area, in the 2 square mile area, a big area. But wherever you've had areas that were particular favorites of whitetails in previous years for feeding in the winter, you know, in November, give them a try. Your odds are going to be pretty good. But you got to get there early because nocturnal deer don't like to feed long during daylight hours. And you're the most likely time to see them in the morning, these nocturnal deer, when they start feeding a little later, is during that first legal shooting hour of the day, which starts 1/2 hour before sunrise. Now we've learned, I won't go into that, we've talked about it in lots of previous seminars, but we've learned that what you got to do if you're going to hunt a feeding area, because you know when you go out in the morning, the deer are already there, and you got to get there. If you're going to be successful there, you got to get there without alarming deer there. And there's a couple ways of doing it. Well, more than one way, but you want to get there at least 30 minutes before first light, before that first minute of legal shooting hour starts, because it's going to take 30 minutes for those deer. Deer are going to hear you. They don't necessarily going to be able to identify you by your footsteps if you do it right, and I won't go into that now. They're going to be suspicious. Gee, something approached, and then it becomes silent over them. And generally, if you don't move and you don't make no noises for 30 minutes, they're going to finally decide whatever you were, you must have kept going. Didn't hear you leave. You're not there anymore. Because they know they can do that. They can move somewhere a great distance without hardly making a sound. If it must have been a deer that they heard or saw little glimpses of something moving through the forest area coming that way. But then they're going to start moving again, start feeding again, and then you're going to see them. So that's kind of what you got. But we're thinking that because they're nocturnal, you got to be sure to get to your stand site at least 30 minutes before the first shooting hour of the day, the legal shooting hour of the day begins. Now, here's another thing. You might not have that going on. You know, a lot of times even then you can have normal temperatures and these deer become nocturnal, like say because of wolves. That makes them nocturnal no matter what the temperature is. You wonder, they got to eat somewhere, and they probably want to eat where they've always found a lot of foods. You know, might be here one day and that really good area over there the next day, and you're kind of guessing. I hate guessing, but you can improve your odds of getting deer if you use the gentle nudge with a larger group of hunters. You know, group stand hunting, we've learned long ago, is much more productive. You're much more likely to take a buck using a group stand hunting method than when you're doing it one-on-one. I have hunted big bucks as long as a week. Well, last time was 10 half days. 10 half days, that buck was feeding in this one big feeding area. It was a large one. And, there was 5 trails, well-used trails that deer used, that the buck used to go in and out of there every day. And every half day I moved to a different one, and it was always around one. It's just like that buck knew exactly where I was. So finally, on the weekend, all the boys were back in camp, and a son-in-law said, I need your help to get this buck. And we went out there, and what we created was a gigantic gentle nudge. And we had 3 guys on one side and off one side. They went in there in the morning, hour before sunrise, 30 minutes before legal shooting time. They went in, 3 guys on the upwind side, on these specific trails where they could watch them, and 2 guys on the downwind side. Me and my son Ken were on the downwind side. And I was close to that buck's bedding here, and I said, well, they'll get past all those guys and I'll get the buck. But no, boom, Ken got the big buck, and it was a dandy. You'll see a picture right there. But what we had going on here is a gigantic gentle nudge on a feeding area. Because when we were set up this way, that buck wasn't going to go this way. It was going to go that way. And it was going to go, it was one of those 2 trails on that side that it regularly used to go in and out of the place. And we got it. And I think what helped too, you know, the guy that was here said he saw some deer, you know, was just getting away. He saw some deer go by him. But he wasn't sure if it was the buck or not, you know, if that buck was involved. So, but I think what happens on a deal like this buck figured he had me in his hip pocket, never have to worry about me. I always knew where he would be. Well, I think the buck driver said, oh, there he is. And he kind of became a little bit lax because he said, I don't have to worry now, I can go anywhere I want, I know where he is, he's just sitting there like those stand hunters do. I can go anywhere I want, and so he went over here and ran into downwind Ken. And Ken dropped him with 1 shot there. Well, anyway, so I think that happens a lot. You know, our bucks, you know, when you're hunting bucks that are trophy class bucks that are 4.5 to 6.5 years old, it means you're hunting a buck or several bucks that have been successfully avoiding you for 4.5 to 6.5 years. How about that? They already know all your tricks and how to avoid you. And so you gotta do something different. You can't keep doing the same thing year after year, setting the same stand site, same food plot, using the same lure scents or grunt call or whatever. When you start doing that, you're just wiping out any chance you have of taking a trophy class buck, unless you're awful lucky, and luck doesn't happen very often. So anyway, these bucks really know you. They know how to avoid you just like nothing. You're just, they own you. And so anyway, anything you can do that's different, that they've never had to deal with before, is likely to be a successful way to take deer. And we've used this gang up, this big, when it first happened, I said, well, we'll call this cover all bases buck hunting. But actually they were gigantic gentle nudges influencing that buck to go downwind without doing it in a way that would make him want to bound away real fast and get the heck out of there and never come back again the rest of the hunt. So when you do things like this, they won't abandon their ranges. They don't feel the need to bound with their tail up, snorting and as they go. They're going to stay there. So tomorrow, we might, if we do something like this in a little different area, we might, if we didn't get the buck, tomorrow we'll have a good chance of taking that buck. Well, the problem we have today, we can't predict things like this because these deer are so moved. You know, with those does moving around like they are, never feeding in the same area twice in a row, or maybe even for a week, and never bedding in the same place twice. Yeah, that used to be a permanent thing. All season long, they'd bed in the same spot, area, maybe 10 acres in size, and feed mostly in one place until they found you there, and then they'd go, oh, we'll go feed over here now because there's a hunter over there. But anyway, what we got to do today is to take likely spots. Like, this used to be a real favorite, and if those nocturnal here, if we're going to see them at any time, it's going to be during that first hour, maybe the last hour of the day too, last half hour, but we're going to see them. You know, the odds are that they're going to be you'll be able to see them are at more limited times a day, but they're predictable, more predictable. Maybe in the old days we might say, oh, it's almost a sure thing. You're certain we're going to see that deer in the morning or later today or something like that in this feeding or on that trail next to the feeding area. Now, theoretically at least, after all our experience in the last 3 years, you're only likely to see a buck using that trail right there. He used it. There's his tracks on it. It's a trail. We'll talk about that more in another seminar, but he's only like come back to that trail while he's searching for does and heat once in 3 days. Next 1, 2, 3 days. Could be as long as 3 days before he comes back and uses that trail again. That's about as close as we can get to being absolutely certain about something. That means instead of moving to a new stand site every half day, from now on in the near future, we're going to be staying at one stand site used by a buck. Now, that's an interesting thing. We're going to talk about that another time, but you know, when a big buck is searching for does, and he doesn't just walk willy-nilly all over the place. He's going to use certain trails most of the time. If there are 10 trails in this one area, there's going to only be one that he's going to use. You know, and if you know how to identify it and how to hunt it, your odds of seeing that buck are 10 times better here than they would be on any one of those other trails somewhere else. You probably don't realize that, but we're going to talk about more of that in the future. But anyway, with these deer being a lot less predictable, what we're going to be doing in the future is be setting up gigantic gentle nudges, 6 or more of us, upwind and downwind areas. Now, you know, this is one thing about group hunting. The reason it's more successful than hunting one-on-one is because anytime you're in the woods and you got a hunter in a tree 200 yards or less upwind, yeah, that guy may never see a deer that goes past his stand. You might spot him from a distance by sight moving, you know, or something like that, or hear him sneeze or blow his nose or whatever. Or pop a can open to drink some pop or whatever. But anyway, or smell him. Yeah. But at any rate, that deer is going to be influenced by that upwind hunter. And one of the things a deer wants to do, whenever he's influenced, he's discovered another hunter, now he's worried about what direction to go. If a deer is between the two, he's going to want to move away from him and he's going to move toward the downwind hunter. So when you're working in like 2 or more hunters working in conjunction with one another, within 200 yards of each other, your odds of seeing a deer are much better than when you're sitting there all by yourself. Because you don't have anybody helping to make deer move in your direction. But whenever you're that close to one another, that's a long way. That's 2 football fields, you know. But when you're that close to one another, your odds of seeing deer are always going to be better. And group hunting is a great way to hunt. You know, my boys and I, we've been hunting one-on-one for 30 years. We love one-on-one hunting. But when it's this way, we're going to be doing primarily group hunting, doing things like this. So we'll be making gigantic gentle nudges, great big ones, and all kinds of different. We start looking at our aerial map. We did that this morning. So, oh man, this would be a great place for that. This would be a great place for that. Oh, I'll show you some examples of what my son and I talked about this morning about that. But this is an exciting thing. I can't wait to do this. We'll be doing this day after day, and our odds of taking deer under current conditions are going to be much, much better. What we're doing is creating a drive. You know, hunters who make drives, been making drives all these years. And I did it for 15 years. My first 15 years as a whitetail hunter was with a gang of relatives and neighbors. We made drives all day long. We'd be going out there before first light and setting up the first light. We'd do it until dark in the evening. And many years, by the 3rd day, we had our limit. you know, there'd be 12 of us in the bunch, and we had 12 deer hanging in a tree in my uncle Jack's yard up in northern Aiken County. And a pretty darn good way to hunt deer, except for two things. Well, that's the advantage of a drive. You make deer move no matter what. And when they're moving around, then they're vulnerable. You know, then you can see them. But anyway, the bad thing about drives is that wherever you make the drive, the surviving deer are going to clear out of the area. They're going to abandon that area for probably the rest of the hunting season. They'll just go back there day after day. There's no deer there. The other one is, in 15 years of hunting, we only took one decent buck that was worthy of taxidermy. It's not a very successful way to take older bucks, and I won't go into that. There are a lot of reasons for that, but it's true. And I hated it. I finally talked my dad into it. We're going to go off on our own, and we're going to do something different. We're going to be stump sitters. And the word stand hunting didn't exist then. There were no tree stands back then. No, nobody knew about tree stands then. But we're going to go sit on stumps, well, or logs in different places, and we're going to find places to do it. And we started seeing bucks and getting bucks. And we got to be better and better at it with time. But at any rate, what we've created here is a drive that doesn't chase bucks out of there, or any other deer. They stay there in the region, and they don't abandon the area. That's one really, really good thing about it. And the other one is it's good for taking older bucks, and for reasons I've already told you about. So we're going to be doing that. Well, one of the areas might be past favorite feeding areas, like big ones, maybe old clear cuts, whole big thing, and just create a massive gentle nudge hunting method or drive. It's actually a drive, using human sense to drive the deer instead of doing it physically or aggressively by walking toward them. So we're going to do that. Might take 4 hours for those deer to get out of their bed and start moving, but that's all right. It's good to get to those spots before the deer in the afternoon, before they get out of their beds, long before, especially if they're nocturnal. But we can get them to start moving earlier because we're there, because they smell it too. There's some hunters and they get a little nervous when you're within 200 yards of where they are. And then they're going to move straight downwind until they get 200 yards downwind, and then they'll go different ways. Now, another place we're going to do it is along watering spots. You know, we got some streams and beaver ponds in our hunting area. And along those streams, there are places, there's bulrushes right out along the edge too, where deer have been going back and forth there so much they got a wide corridor right through the bulrushes. I'll show you a picture of that here in a minute. Or there's a well-worn trail, you know, right? It's just dirt going down to the water's edge. Here's another picture of that. And anyway, you'll see that there's certain places where whitetails like to go and feed. Maybe it's because they feel safer in there. The cover is there that keeps them well hidden while they're drinking water. But they pick these different places. And now, when you got nocturnal whitetails, because it's hot, they're going to get thirsty during the day. You know, our nocturnal whitetails last year, they were only feeding, only moving around at strange hours. A lot of them, they only were moving between 11:30 at night and 3:30 in the morning. Imagine that. How do you hunt whitetails like that? But normally, those deer will eat twice a day, get their fill twice a day, and drink water before and after feeding or any other time they feel like they need water. But when it's hot, they need water more than normally. I can't prove it yet, but I think it's absolutely certain when it's hot and deer aren't moving because of it, they're going to be sneaking to water during daylight hours. And if you got places in your hunting area where there's water and there's trails where deer have made to the water, those are the kind of places where those deer are almost certain to go to drink water. Now, what I have in mind, and I can't wait to set them up, now like I said, we got streams, is that, like here's one, here, just kind of a rough thing, but here's a big high, here's a hillside, goes up steep. It's so steep, most hunters wouldn't want to even try to climb up to the top up there, but there's a hillside. It's not just from here to the next block, this is something like a quarter mile. And down along the bottom here are various places where deer go to drink water. And guess what? I think those deer that are nocturnal during the day actually bed where there's food. So if they're hungry, they can get up and maybe walk over here to there and eat some browse and maybe over here a little bit and then lay down again. Places where hunters could sit over here all day long and never see a deer move. Now this hillside I'm talking about, that is dense cover. I mean, there can be 100 deer over in most of it, and you can look up there and you wouldn't see a deer. It's that dense. Windfalls all over the place. It's a mess there. But it would be a great place for whitetails to hole up during the day that are nocturnal. And it would be nice there because little short distance, just go down there and get a drink of water and get right back. I think that's kind of places they're bedding nowadays, where there's food close at hand and water close at hand. And when we start our scouting this fall, we're going to be looking into that. I'm going to go up back and forth across this hillside, and I'll bet you I'll find all kinds of places. But you go in spring, if you scout early in spring, when you get there slow, right after snow melt, all the trails and tracks and even ground scrapes and antler rubs and things that those whitetails made during the previous fall and early winter look almost like they were done yesterday. Easy to see. That's why one of the reasons I love early spring scouting. I want to go up and down that slope in early spring, next spring, like first week in May, be there. That's a good time here in Minnesota for scouting in the spring. I want to be there. I want to look at that. And then, if it looks like I'm right, that they've been bedding on that hillside, then you find an antler rub maybe or two, or groundscape or two there in there. There's been a big buck up there too. Or we find the big tracks, the big, droppings that are the individual pellets or insulin. There's been a buck spending time there. Well, one thing I want to do is we don't have a trail, definitive trail at the top of that slope. So we're going to make a trail and mark it with fluorescent text. So these guys, we can get to those upwind and downwind areas easily when we go out to hunt. We're going to do that with other places like that in our whole hunting area. We're going to set it up for gigantic, gentle nudges. And boy, that's going to be we're going to have a lot different results than we did when we were hunting one-on-one. My son John was starting to think I was getting too much, I'm trying to do too much on one map here. And he's probably right, so I drew a larger map here of one small area. Well, this isn't a small area. This is a big, tall hill. Great big tall. This side is almost like a cliff. You'd have to be a mountain climber to go up that and down that side. And on this side there's a stream running around the bottom here. Now, this is based on some assumptions I've come to in the last 3 years of dealing with the problem we have. Not being able to predict at all where those deer are going to be on any one day. They can be here one day and another day a mile away the next. And it's hard to hunt when it's like this, especially if you're a stand hunter. So we're going to start using, and we've got dozens of places where we're going to do this, where we can set up some gigantic gentle nudges. And this hill is going to be one of the first ones. This hillside, it's a long slope here on this side. It's still pretty steep, but it's heavily wooded. There's a lot of windfalls there. It's like a jungle. Trees laying down all over. The storms seem to be knocking trees down there all the time. Every time we go through, there's more down. Now we've got a trail that goes around the bottom of this hill, and there's a stream that runs all along this side. Are you getting that there, Cody? Well, anyway, we've discovered that in this last year that there are some spots along this stream where the deer have been going there so often they've gone right through bulrushes, this flat area, 4 feet wide, where they've been going back and forth to get water. And we found other places like that too. This makes me think that nocturnal whitetails aren't as nocturnal as we think they are in our hunting area. You know, normally our whitetails they eat twice a day, early in the day and late in the day, and they drink water before and after, maybe just after or just before, depending on the weather. But they drink water every time during those feeding hours. A lot of times twice during that feeding hour, a lot of water. I have a hard time believing they can go an entire day, especially when it's hot, it's 70 degrees, or 60 or 50, without water. And because of that, I think our whitetails during the day are bedding where they're close to water. So that if they get thirsty, they can go over there just a little ways, maybe 100 feet, and drink water and go back and lay down again. Moreover, I think, I have it hard to believe that they only eat once a day in the middle of the night. I mean, that's so unlike whitetails. And so I got a feeling also, and we're going to do a lot of scouting next spring to find out if it's true. You know, when you can see all the trails and other deer signs they made, including their droppings and ground scrapes and antler rubs, and evidences of feeding. It all looks like it was just done a week ago when you go up there right after snow melt in the spring and scout. When all of a sudden all these signs are bared, the snow's gone, there they are on the trail, and there's no leaves yet. You can see them way over there. So anyway, we're going to scout this area. But we're going to do this all over this huge area we hunt. And we got lots of places like that. But there's this hillside. Now we know deer like to feed on that hillside. And you know, we haven't messed around on that hillside ever very much, except down at the bottom here, because it's such an awful place to climb, to go up there. And the peak is up here where this dotted line is. Now, a lot of the trail work that we did last year was to design to give us a chance to take 3 bucks over this way. So we created a trail that comes around and connects with this trail. It used to end right about here, and that was it. No more, it didn't go any further. But now we can come in to this area from different sides. So what we're going to do, we're going to set up, this will be one of the first places we do a gigantic gentle nudge. And we'll have hunters along the way, have hunters come in on a trail. This is a trail we've used for years, but they'll come in, and we'll leave one in this area on this side of where the hill is, and another one, we're going to have to make a new trail or on the peak here, get a hunter over on this side somewhere in this area, like where that X is, and then other hunters going in the position, they can go on the downwind side along here, like if the wind's blowing from that direction. But it doesn't matter what direction the wind is going. We can do this with any wind direction. Because there's somewhere where it's going to be upwind and some are going to be downwind. Some will be crosswind. But anyway, we're going to go back around. Other hunters can go down here and get set up here, and we can have hunters come over here, one there and one there. And we've got a gigantic gentle nudge going, only relying on human airborne scent to make those deer move. So they aren't going to be galloping around up there because we're there. This is a big area. This is more than a quarter mile long. This is a big area. So that's going to be one of our first gentle nudges this year. And we start looking at the aerial maps. Oh, here'd be another great place for that. Here'd be another great place for that. And you know what? We're going to get deer. We're going to get bucks. We aren't going to shoot does or fawns or yearlings. we're going to get mature bucks doing this. We're going to catch them. When we don't know where we're going to find them, when we create large gentlemen, big ones, we're going to catch some deer on there. And maybe this one won't work, but maybe the next one will, and so forth. They're in that 10 square mile area somewhere, all day long, every day. They're somewhere out there. And rather than one guy going out and saying, oh, I'm going to go sit here, that's a terrible thing. Maybe there's none there, he won't say anything all that. Maybe there's 12 deer there. But as long as they're downwind of me, he's never going to see them. That's not going to happen. So, but when we got it set up like this group hunt, we're going to get deer. And you know, we'll catch deer in that area by doing this time and time again over the year. I'll bet you, opening weekend, we'll probably hunt one-on-one because we're so used to it. We like that. We find stand sites we like. We'll hunt out there. One guy got a deer doing that last year, that yearling that my grandson got. This is one way to find those deer more quickly than any other way. But anyway, there's a lot of guys involved here. Maybe only one guy will get the buck out of it, but we're getting one that way. And because in a 2 square mile area, we may only have one dominant breeding buck. Well, hopefully it'll be a little better there this year, but we'll see. But we're going to capture deer in these areas if we go into position really early. Like I was saying, the downwind guy's got to get there without the deer knowing it. Upwind guys got to go in laterally. So downwind deer are frightened by it appearing that they're coming straight toward them. There's a little split right here where we come in on this older trail of ours, but from there on everybody's moving laterally, and everywhere else they're moving laterally. Even this guy, I'm coming here, we got a trail here now, this one coming in this way, it'll be laterally. So if there's a deer there, they aren't going to be worried about the hunter, they're going to stay there. But when they do move, they're going to go downwind, up to 200 yards. And if there's deer anywhere in here, when they move downwind, or go to get a drink of water, these fellas down here are going to get the deer. So that's the way it's going to work. So, boy, now you see what group hunting can do for you, and I hope we have a lot of fine pictures for you this next year to show you how well this works. But I know it's going to work because there's deer there. We just don't know where they're going to be from time to time during the day. But anyway, that's what we'll be doing. We'll be setting up 2 a day, maybe. Some days, maybe not. Like, let's say we get one here. Maybe they don't move till later in the day. Then we got an awful long drag to camp from there. A tough drag too at that. So maybe 1 a day. But even if it accounts for only 1 buck a day, it's going to be much, much better than the last 3 years that we've had of deer hunting in that area. So that's what we're going to do. It has to work. There's no way it won't work. It's going to work. But only group stand hunting in a manner that doesn't make deer abandon the area, and in a manner that enables you to take older bucks as well, is going to work. Yeah, well, the good part of it is that these gigantic gentle nudges are actually drives. They're just non-aggressive, as non-aggressive a drive as you can imagine, only using human scent to move deer. And when you do it that way, then you have deer galloping all over the place, and older bucks getting out of there because they're so used to dealing with drives, that kind of thing. So they're going to be, so we get the advantage of a drive without the disadvantages of a drive. And this gentle nudge hunting technique is one of several ways that we'll be able to use that kind of a hunting method. This is the least aggressive of hunting methods imaginable that will always move nocturnal deer. they're not going to be comfortable when they know there's hunters within 100 yards of them. They're going to move eventually. Might not till they decide it's time to eat or go get a drink of water, but eventually they're going to move, and when they do, they're going to go downwind. And so this moves nocturnal deer without the disadvantages of traditional deer drives. So with that, I want to thank you for watching today. And you watch and see. This is going to be the big hunting method for a long time to come because of climate warming. Wherever you hunt white deer, you're going to have serious problems with it. You're probably experienced it already. If you're a good hunter, you're a veteran hunter, there's something wrong out there in the woods. Things aren't the way they used to be. You're just not seeing many deer nowadays. And gee, you never see older bucks hardly. It's just a rare thing. Well, this is what's going to turn it around. It can be nocturnal as they want, but it isn't going to. You're going to make a move regardless and become vulnerable, and you're going to be able to take deer using this method without chasing all the deer out of there. You want to be able to hunt there tomorrow and the next day, in adjoining areas. You don't want to ruin your hunting area with aggressive hunting methods like drives or just wandering around aimlessly in your hunting area dark to dark. That's almost as bad as drives. You can ruin the area in 1 or 2 days, a whole square mile, 1 or 2 days doing that. Sitting there in a tree or on the ground, on the ground level, 3-4 hours a day, or a half day, you aren't chasing deer around. But you are, if you're doing it, using it group-wise, a group hunting method, you are moving deer that you wouldn't move otherwise. So they're going to be moving. So there you go. Well, now, before you check off, please hold on a minute. Poke that subscribe button down there on the bottom, will you please? It only takes a minute to subscribe and it costs nothing, but it helps me. Do it for me. And also that thumbs up button if you feel like it was worth listening to this seminar today. So, and I'm sure you feel that way too. So do that. And also, I didn't go into all the details of gentle nudge hunting method. You might think now you know all about how to do it, but there's more to know about this. And you'll find it covered in greater detail in some of my other books, especially my 10th edition of Whitetail Hunter's Almanac. So if you don't have that book yet, you've got to have it. and we're going to be talking about other hunting methods as well that are introduced in that 10th edition. And some of the other editions, but you want to know more, everything you want to that's possibly be known about using these hunting methods, and you'll find them all in that 10th edition of Whitetail Hunter's Almanac. So you still need that book. I'm working on another one. One of these days we'll let you know when it's ready, but it's another book as valuable as the 10th edition. Not as big, but as valuable. We'll let you know more about it when it's ready, or it's gone to the printer, and because that's another one you're going to really want. You're going to love that new book I'm writing. I've been working so hard. I've been in a cave for a while here working on it, but it's getting close. So I consider it one of the best books I've ever written, and I think you're going to really like this one. Well, with that, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.